Hello and welcome to another edition of another book review. This week I'll be reviewing Stag by Dane Bahr. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into a spoiler-free overview of the plot, talk about what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off there. Not quite sure what I'm going to be reading for next time. Stag is Dane Bahr's second novel. The first novel that he wrote is a book called, I believe, The Houseboat, that came out a few years before. This came out in 2024. Dane Bahr has also released another novel earlier this year that I have not read, and I also did not read The Houseboat. So the only book of his that I've read so far is Stag. I should tell folks kind of going into it, based on just kind of cursory glance, The Houseboat and Stag both share a character who is Amos Fielder, similar to a book I reviewed a long time ago, The Devil and Webster, where the author has written various novels in a character's life. Um, that book, The Houseboat, and this book, Stag, share a character separated by about 30 years. Um, and I don't think you need to read The Houseboat to get this book. This works really well as a standalone. But to go briefly into Dane Bahr, Dane Bahr is an author who I believe was born in Minnesota. He now currently writes in Washington State, where this book is set. And I believe this is the second of his three novels. It wasn't very much about him online, but he is a contemporary author. He's still writing stuff. He wrote something to be published this year that I think is separate from what I can gather from the first two books. So the first two books share a character. Third book doesn't share that character, just from a cursory glance. So not all three are connected, and I don't think you need to have read The Houseboat to read this book. But if I'm wrong and people have read all three, feel free to leave something in the comments to make sure that I get that correct, because I think that is important. Um, Stag. This book is about a retired sheriff who has retired from Iowa after the death of his wife. Uh, he retired from Iowa, moved to Washington State, where he becomes friends with a local game warden, and both of them kind of team up in order to track down a serial killer who is killing young women. And that's the one sentence synopsis of this book. It's a very, I think, kind of gets you in the mindset very quickly of what the book is. I really enjoyed the first chapter. It really does, I think, a good job of encapsulating what the rest of the book is. It's a very gritty book. If you've seen the movie Seven, it gave me a little bit of those vibes as far as the tone goes. I like the character of Fielder. I have some sympathy for him. I also think that Dane Bahr does a very good job of writing um, with enough description to give you a real sense of place without overbearing you with purple prose, which is very difficult to do. Each place in the book feels unique as these two characters kind of travel around looking for hunting the serial killer down, trying to bring him to justice. I think the descriptions of rain, you kind of get the sense it's always raining there, and kind of it being this washed out but lush place. I really enjoyed those things. The book moves at a pretty healthy clip. It's not super long. It's like a really good thriller in that sense, is that the chapters are short and punchy and it kind of keeps moving. So I enjoyed those things. I think that if there was anything that I didn't like, there's some character motivation stuff that is a little dodgy. There's some stuff in the um, there's a couple characters who I think are kind of underutilized in the book. I think that there's kind of maybe some twists and turns that were unnecessary. I enjoyed it while I was reading it, but after I was done, I don't know how much is really going to stick with me. A lot of it comes down to the book is what it felt like to me was kind of a cross between No Country for Old Men and Silence of the Lambs. I don't think it's good as either of those books, and I enjoyed it while I was reading it. So if you're looking for something that's just I want something to read. I'm at a beach or whatever. I want something that has a bit of punch to it, a bit of gore, but it's not overly gory. But I'm rooting for these characters. Then I think it's a good book. The characters I wish were a little bit more. There's a little bit more depth to them. They do feel relatively stock. You have kind of the retired sheriff who's kind of dragged into one more job. You have kind of the very overly analytical FBI agent. You have kind of this gruff sheriff. So you have kind of these like stock characters. And I think Bahr is good enough a writer. He's strong enough as a writer when he's writing these descriptions of places. I wish he had worked a little bit more on the characters to give them a little bit more, um, gave them a little bit more dimension to make them really more three dimensional. I think that would have been really helpful. There's, like I said, there's some character motivation things I can't really get into without spoiling it that I thought were lacking in places. And I think that for what the book is, I enjoyed it while I was reading it. And if that premise sounds appealing to you, if you're looking for something that is Silence of the Lambs crossed with No Country for Old Men, then I think you're really going to enjoy this. There's a little bit of the philosophical elements in this that feel a little bit shoehorned, but I enjoyed it while I was reading it, and I would recommend it to someone who wants something. If you are, there's a lot of like content warnings with this book. Obviously, it is really about a serial killer. I like the fact that it's set in the 1980s, and I think he does a pretty good job of kind of using that setting to kind of get the feel of what the place is like in this time where the technology hasn't advanced obviously to things like cellular phones, but you have kind of the introduction. You still have video stores around, and so I like that. I thought that I'm interested to see what he does next as a writer. I was a little underwhelmed by. It's one of those things where I felt like I enjoyed the book while I was reading it. I thought it was well done. I thought it was a page turner. I was rooting for the characters, but looking back on it, I think it could have been stronger overall. It is one of those things where you're writing a thriller and you're always trying to balance how quickly do you want the reader to go through this thing without overloading the reader with backstory and unique motivations and psychology and all that stuff. And then that's always a balance. I think he could have leaned a little bit more into making more the characters, making them feel less stock than I think he does. And I don't want to harp on the motivations. Like I said, I've kind of covered this already, but there's some motivations that I felt were lacking where it's like, does that really make total sense there? Could have that been more detailed of why these characters are acting the way that they do? So there's some plot holes and stuff too that are not really worth covering other than say that they exist. It's not by any means a perfect novel, but if you want something that is uh, definitely has some acts of violence. There's sexual violence in the book. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I think would actively bother people. There's certain characters are in certain states of drug use against their will, and so all of those things, as far as things that are going to bother people, it is really an R-rated serial killer book. It's like basically watching, like I said, Silence of the Lambs or Seven or No Country for Old Men, and so it really has that kind of dark and gritty tone. And so if any of those things bother you, it's not really the book for you. But if you're looking for something that's a page turner, where I think that it's a fun book to read. I don't know if it's going to stick with you super long, but it is something to read if you're on a plane or beach or whatever. I think it does a good job. Like I said, I'm also interested to see what he does next. I read the description of the next book. I don't know if that's necessarily the one for me, but I'm going to keep my eye out because there was enough of this book that I liked where I'm going to be interested to see what he does in the future, if he kind of becomes more able to develop character a little bit more strongly than in this one. But that is Stag by Dane Bahr. Until next time, I'll leave my Twitter link below, so if you want to follow me there, feel free. I'm not sure exactly what I'll be reading for next time, but I'll be back. And thank you, and bye.